Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this long overdue hearing by the full committee on America's infrastructure needs and the possible provisions to pay for it. You know, Sam and I could write a great bill in terms of policy, but the bottom line is we need investment. Today, you know, if you look at federal spending, which we haven't increased gas tax since '93, basically we've cut federal spending by 20% in real terms. The Highway Trust Fund is running a $16 billion a year deficit in terms of the current revenues, so we're borrowing $16 billion a year to backfill the Highway Trust Fund. You know, that still is not an adequate investment according to the American Society of Civil Engineers over the next 10 years. We're going to be about $1 trillion short for surface transportation needs from all sources. So the needs are huge, $836 billion for unmet capital for highways and bridges. 50,000 bridges need substantial repair or replacement. 40% of the national highway system needs not just to be resurfaced, but to be rebuilt. And about $100 billion in terms of transit, and that's just to bring things up to a state of good repair. That's not to get to the point where we're mitigating congestion, giving people new transit alternatives in the urban areas. And the costs of doing nothing are astronomical. You know, a couple of examples, Brent Spence Bridge between Ohio and Kentucky. It's about a $3 billion project. It's going up by $100 million a year every year we delay, and the estimates are the current bridge won't be usable in 10 years. Then what do you do? We have the tunnels under the Hudson River, Gateway and the Portal Bridge. Those tunnels went near failure during Hurricane Sandy. If they fail, the costs to the economy are $100 million a day. And if you wanted to build 2 new tunnels on an emergency basis, maybe you can get done in 4 years. So you've now spent $140 billion of lost economic activity because you wouldn't invest in a $16 billion project. Business Roundtable says we lose $27 billion per year in extra transportation costs because of congestion and delays. For drivers, are people driving small vehicles, individual vehicles. They wasted 3.1 billion gallons of fuel stuck in traffic, and their annual repair bill due to disrepair for their cars runs an average of $1,400. As I said, we're shoring up the Highway Trust Fund now by borrowing, and over the next 10 years we'll be short $164 billion with current revenues just to maintain the status quo, which is inadequate. Now, there's some, you know, proposing P3s, private-public partnerships. I brought this report. I will email one to every member of the committee. This was a bipartisan select committee of transportation 5 years ago, which came to the conclusion that P3s, private-public partnerships, can address somewhere close to 10 to 12% of our needs because much of the system can't make money. So you cannot engage the private sector in doing those projects. Similarly, an infrastructure bank, which some would say will solve all the problems. We have private activity bonds. We have TIFIA loans. We could put more money into those programs. You could create an infrastructure bank, but that, again, is only going to lend itself to things that have revenue. Yeah, you can toll some of the bridges, but you know, there's no transit system in the world that makes money. Most of the highways we're talking about don't carry volumes that are adequate, even if you tolled them, and many of those bridges, same thing. So we need real federal investment. Others say, let's go to a VMT. Well, we're not ready to jump to a vehicle miles traveled. I would like to do a nationwide pilot program. My state is on its second pilot. There are a lot of issues with VMT, vehicle miles traveled. If you're going to do it fairly, you have to do it with real-time pricing, congestion pricing, because someone who drives 25 miles to the feed store in a rural area is not contributing to deterioration or congestion. Someone who jumps on 205 in Portland is. They shouldn't pay the same per mile fee, and there is a little bit of concern among people, particularly in my rural areas, about the government tracking their movements. So we've got to work our way through that, but if we do a nationwide pilot, and in 10 or 12 years, we will be ready to move there. I have proposed something very de minimis because people are afraid of the gas tax, although many states, way more than half the states now have raised their gas tax. No one's lost their election over it, and many of those are substantial increases. But I said, okay, well, anybody think you're going to lose your election if gas goes up 1.5 cents a gallon? I never get anybody to raise their hand. You want to raise your hand? Okay, no one here either. So I had penny for progress, index the gas and diesel tax, and then bond the projected income. You could issue bonds for 13 years in tranches of about $33 to $35 billion, fill in the hole in the trust fund, create another $17 billion a year for a needed backlogged spending. And sure, it creates a cliff out there a decade or so, but in a decade or so, we will have much higher penetration of electric vehicles, and we will need to move to vehicle miles traveled in order to have a system that's equitable. With that, Mr. Chairman, I hope that this committee will take substantial action to raise revenues. There is a provision in the current FAST Act. We could do nothing, and if you raise revenues, they will flow through the existing formulas. If the money was there today, the states would have the money tomorrow under existing formulas, and they would be contracting for this construction season. There are perhaps some changes we would like to make in some of the provisions in a short-term bill, but generally that's the bottom line. You put up the money, it'll get done.